Ever since childhood, I'd been interested in M.C. Escher and his works of amazing art. The way he made two-dimensional shapes and drawings blend into three-dimensional appearance. It always fascinated the ever-loving fuck out of me. I couldn't help but to smile when looking at any of his work, or most related to it. So in 1981, when flyers depicting impossible shapes and figures started to litter our streets, I noticed. These flyers were printed out on colored paper, using the common dot matrix printers of the era. There was never a number or name, no excuse for these flyers. They depicted impossible shapes and figures that seemed to threaten to jump from the page directly into your eyes. They stared innocent enough at first, a few impossible triangle shapes, maybe some stairs that twist into nothing, shit like that. After a couple days, things started to get darker. The new flyers were a mixture of Escher and Poe, as in Edgar Allan Poe. Instead of staircases and triangles, it was now headstones and open graves. Everything had eyes. The eyes seemed to move and blink, if you moved the paper just right. People in town were starting to talk and worry and talk some more. Things got a little comical at times, with theories ranging from a deranged serial killer to ads for an upcoming restaurant. Of course, nobody actually knew what they were. See, small towns across the country have one thing in common: gossip. Not every citizen had seen the flyers yet, as some areas were even more remote. In fact, it looked like someone would just dump a load of flyers and let the wind deliver them. It was about 5 days in when the flyers got even more disturbing, and even hostile. To look at these images for long seemed to drive folks temporarily crazy as balls. To this day, I can picture those fucking flyers. At first, there's nothing really there, just shapes and lines and dots, like the much later Magic Eye things. If you gaze at the images just right, you could see the hidden pictures. Up to this point, all of the flyers released at one time would be printed on the same color paper, and had the exact same design. This time things were vastly different. Blue sheets depicted some sort of animal feasting on a flayed open corpse. Yellow sheets revealed some type of thing erupting from a man's back. Green sheets, those were the ones that got to me. They depicted children eating from a dead body or a woman. The red sheets, they showed something that appeared to be Satan, half man, half goat, with twisted horns, a long spade-tipped tail, and forked tongue. This round of flyers triggered numerous calls flooding into the 911 dispatch center, located in the basement of the courthouse. At least 200 people called in, some even going as far to walk 3 miles to a payphone, just to call and report those vile flyers. That is what spurred my boss into making me point on the investigation. This would be my first trip to the rodeo of detectivehood. It was both a big honor and a giant fuck you to me. Because if I could actually solve this, or at least peg the sick bastard distributing the flyers, it would cement my career. Or if I failed, however, it would kill it. I started my investigation by looking for patterns of where and when the flyers showed up. I noticed the flyers would be distributed early mornings, before sunup, on days with strong early morning winds. That told me that Perp was intelligent and had a way to accurately predict the high winds. It also showed the locations I thought to be drop points. A peak above the town, a ridge behind the town, and even high hills and people's farms. Anywhere with a higher elevation than that of the town square. That explained why some folks hadn't ever seen a flyer. They were in valleys and to the other side of town. I decided to hop in the car and go to the nearest drop point. I didn't use lights or sirens because I didn't think the course of investigation was an emergency. When I finally arrived on the top of Reynolds Point, I was greeted with an awful sight indeed. There was what appeared to be a crude altar constructed of rocks, twigs, and tanned skins from deer and squirrel. Upon the flat small rock in the middle of the altar was a corpse of a mountain cat, a small breed of mountain lion. It had been killed and dissected with haste, as if someone was hurriedly looking for something inside this poor animal's body. Its intestines coiled beside its head, the stomach had been flipped inside out, and was now holding the poor thing's penis and testicles. In place of its missing eyes, 2 chunks of amber, each holding a small lizard-looking thing inside. I called out for the evidence collection team to clean the mess up as I drove to the next expected drop spot. I drove to Madlands Ridge with lights on and my foot on the throat of my interceptor. I used to love the sound those things made, when the 4-barrel would open and the engine could really stretch its legs. I was driving fast, too fast honestly, when I approached the Ridge access road. I almost didn't make the turn, but stupidity was strong with this one that day. I flew up that road now using the siren, and as I was about to slow down to pull off the road at the hiking trail, a gigantic black dog, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen, charged from the forest directly towards my car. I slammed the brakes, attempting to not murder someone's pet, but couldn't slow the massive four-door cruiser in time. I watched as the creature's face distorted into something unimaginable, just as the front bumper rammed through its body. There was no thud, no dents, no blood. It wasn't really there. I stopped the boat of a car in the middle of the road and just sat there, looking around while the lights and sirens continued to run. I was shaken from my stupor when the radio crackled to life. The evidence team had found the altar. They weren't happy, but had no choice but to collect everything. I finally managed to steer the car over to the wide spot so I could park and hike my fat ass up the little hill to the flat-lined ridge line. As I climbed the hill, I noticed darker spots in the soil and splotches of reddish-black fluid on the fallen leaves. That nervous feeling in my stomach started to increase to an almost intolerable level. I could feel something in my bones, and I knew I would find something terrible on that hill. I expected another altar, complete with a mutilated animal corpse. I was right, but oh so wrong. As I neared the top of the hill, I could see the circle of field stones surrounding the makeshift altar. Upon the altar, a body all right, but not a fucking woodland animal like I expected. The body was human, a small child, naked and mutilated. Insides torn out and strewn about the altar. Poor kid's head wasn't there. Neither were his fingers or the soles of his feet. The bastard took everything we could use to get an ID. Now I was pissed. I called the dispatch to have Irene turn out the coroner and let the evidence crew know they had more work up here too. Later that day I'd find 3 more altars, each topped with a different form of a body. Deer, sheep, coyote, then the poor mountain cat and the child. Each location was documented, cleaned, removed, and reconstructed in the basement of the jail. That was where we did our recreations. It took us a while to figure this next bit out, actually too long. It was 3 days later when I finally decided to put thumbtacks in the county map to designate each altar. That's when it became apparent. The fucking altars were arranged in a pentagram. The fact cemented the idea of Satanism into our minds. Hell, if it had not been for the child's body, we would have collectively shrugged the entire thing off as a prank by some sick-ass fucking teenagers. We would never have thought it was what it turned out to be. During the next week, we talked to more than 100 people, the biggest majority of which were clueless to what we asked. There are a few things we managed to find out were into drugs, but no Satan worship. That is until we discovered a little woman by the name of Gina Paisley, a self-proclaimed white witch turned dark master of magic. Magic being spelled with a K, of course. Tina was nervous when confronted with pictures of the animals. I saved the child's body for last to help me gauge her involvement incrementally. When I slid that picture from the folder and placed it on the table in front of her, she went nuts. She jumped into the chair she was seated in and started to pull large handfuls of hair from her head, as she screamed, "No, not like that! You called wrong. He was wrong. We're all going to die if he isn't stopped." My sergeant and I exchanged worried glances, and a deputy restrained her and cuffed her to the table. When she finally calmed herself a bit, we continued to question her. During the questioning, which lasted 11 hours due to her mental breakdowns, we discovered her and her son had been trying to summon a demon to do their, and I quote, "dirty work we can't without going to prison." It took us an additional hour and a half to find the son. When we kicked the door of his trailer home in, he was standing behind the little Lawson girl. Poor little Amy was tied to a chair with a gag in her mouth and a blindfold on her head. That was all she was wearing. I shot before I thought. I saw the knife in his hand, and I saw him move that hand towards the girl. I turned his head into a jackass-o'-lantern. We searched the home after releasing the terrified child, and me giving her my jacket and button shirt to wear till the ambulance arrived. There were a few dozen books of summoning rituals, all in Latin. We had to send the books to the University of Kentucky to be translated. We also found 2 more children tied up in the spare bedroom, drugged and asleep. The guy had taken them from a few towns over to avoid raising suspicion. We found his journal. In it, he wrote of how he wanted to summon his dark lord and give himself wholly to said beast. Most of the spiral-bound book was different written fantasies in which the devil would sexually assault the writer, sometimes with force, most often by the guy's own choice. He talked about how the world was not good enough to house him and his mother, who he admitted to be in a sexual relationship with, and having had a child by her as well. He then talks about how that baby was sacrificed to Satan on its 666th day of life. That was what started his quest to raise Satan. Gino was charged with complicity to kidnapping, complicity to murder, cruelty to animals, desecration of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and even with incest. She was sentenced to 98 years and a day by Honorable Judge T. Lawson. We never found the computers that printed the paper. Hell, the Paisleys neither one owned a computer nor a printer. We did, however, receive an anonymous letter claiming to have been responsible for the flyers, saying they knew those two were up to some sick shit and knew if the pictures got bad enough, we would investigate. We never saw another Twisted Escher wannabe. That case brings a tear whenever I remember it. I mourn not only for the child, but for the parents of that child. Being out there knowing your child is gone, but not where, why, or even if she was alive. If they read this, please forgive me. I tried to get an ID. Even a few years ago went so far as to pay for a DNA testing. However, the blood was too degraded. Same with the marrow. I tried to bring your family closure. I'm so sorry.